Hello, I'm here with Bill Nicholson, our Commercial Director. I'm going to have a little conversation about all things commercial associated with an opportunity. And Bill, who's had 35 years experience in the oil and gas industry, most of that in a commercial role, he's the guy who's got all the knowledge. So Bill, once we've identified an opportunity, what are the sort of things that we need to start thinking about commercial?
Well, we need to consider whether it's an existing operation or whether we're moving into a new country. If we're moving into a new country, we don't need to do a lot of data collection. What's the legislative regime? Do we have an entity set up? Do we need a JV partner? Do we have all the information on salaries, burdens and other costs in order to develop a cost estimate and a commercial model for that opportunity?
And obviously, having the cost estimate, we probably need to understand what its scope is, and two, what our execution plan is going to be.
Yeah.
So in terms of let's assume it's a new country, so we've got all of this data to be collected on our costs. That's the sort of the exercise that we'd actually sort of get our business development guy or our operations guy in country to actually sort of be able to do. Yeah. So and then from most of the work that we don't manufacture, we don't have widgets or anything like that. Most of our people are people costs. So what are the type of costs that we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, the biggest cost in our business is people, and there's lots of aspects of people costs. We need to understand how we're going to employ the people. Is it an international payroll, local payroll, number of different types of payroll? We need the salary data. In mature areas, we've got all that information through our HR functions. New countries, we need to do some research either through the business development and operations people or doing studies through companies that offer these services. We also need to understand the social burdens in that country, statutory holidays, social contributions, the tax regime for expats, and all the other costs that go along with the employment of people. In some areas, the costs will include a certain non-recoverable in terms of holidays, sick pay, corporate training, etc. But at the end of the day, we build up rates or fees for people, but the flow of work may not necessarily recover the cost of all the available man hours, if you like. So we need to look at utilisation in these different offices as well, or sites. Sites, I suppose, it's more around the non-productive time. In offices, it's just pure utilisation of a technical group or a support group, etc.
I mean, that's quite an important part, really, is utilisation, and I think you captured it well, both from a site, from a non-productive element, and also the non-productive side on a white-collar side, where it may be workflow coming through from the customer. And that is something that is quite important that we definitely need to understand before we can actually sort of move forward. Just going back a little bit, we talked there about new countries and potentially joint venture partners. So from a commercial aspect, what are the issues then we need to be cognizant of when we're looking at a new partner?
If we're looking at a new partner, apart from the obvious undertaking due diligence and building a relationship with a potential JV partner, before we get to preparing a tender, we need to agree with the partner the various aspects of the tender that will be executed by Wood Group PSN or by the partner. So that needs to be clear up front to avoid any problems later in the tender that we're missing information. So typically we would ask the partner probably to obtain all the local costs for us to build into the models, but we would tend, because of our experience, to drive the remuneration model and call on the partner to provide the input as he needs it. We also need to be aware of what the partner's capability is. Can he deliver on what he promises, and is he going to be competitive? So we need to help the partner with the cost models, because in many cases he won't be familiar how the oil and gas industry works. Very few of them have experience of reimbursable or open book contracting. That's alien to a lot of them. They come from a lump sum or a price type environment.
You raised quite a few things for me there, Bill, but just sticking on people, we've talked about people costs, but there are also certain non-people costs that we need to be aware of. Can you elaborate a little bit on what they could be?
Yeah, and the non-people costs, I suppose it comes into two main categories. You've got office-based people and you've got site-based people. Office-based people, the non-people costs would tend to be the real estate, the cost of running the office, cost of running IT, computers, software, transport costs, and all the other aspects of running an office. On the field side, what we typically call is field overhead. It's things like protective clothing, safety equipment, tools, training, consumables. There could be a variety of things depending on how the client wants the pricing completed. When we review a tender, we go through it in a lot of detail to see what's reimbursable, what needs to be included in our rates, and that determines the amount of non-people costs we build in. Training is a good example. A lot of clients we cost for what we'll call the basic or the statutory training, and that may be covered in a rate or a fee, but all the client-specific training could be recoverable as reimbursable or rates, etc., or the client may fund the courses, but there is a time to doing these courses.
Mm-hmm. And just stepping back in, you talked earlier about reimbursable unit rate, lump sums. Can you maybe just sort of talk a little bit about the differences between these various commercial models?
Yeah, a lot of the oil and gas contracts are what we call reimbursable or open book, where we build up a rate model, but we are paid for the actual cost of the people. So if a person has a salary of a rate of 40,000 a year or £400 or £500 a day, that's the actual cost that the client reimburses us, and then we get a multiplier or a markup or a burden to cover the payroll burdens, etc., etc. So very low risk in that we're not taking the risk on salaries or rates. Then you've got schedules of rates, so we'll quote a rate per hour for a discipline, say a structural engineer or a planner, etc., or a manager. So we are taking the risk that we can provide the person for that rate. Unit rates is activity based, so typical of some of the international contracts that a client may ask us to provide a rate for installing pipe per metre, cable per metre, or welds each, bolt-ups, etc. And then traditional lump sum where we're given a price to undertake a particular scope of work. Of course, the Wood Group PSN model is that we tend to be a reimbursable rate type based contracting environment, and we don't promote lump sums, especially where there's high risk involved.
Okay, Bill, so we've covered people costs, we've covered non-people costs, we've covered the costs of set-up for new partners, etc. But sometimes there are costs associated with compliance with the contract terms. Could we maybe just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there are a number of what I would say other commercial costs or funded liabilities that we need to consider. The key ones would be financing. What are the payment terms? Do we get an upfront payment? Can we get neutral funding? There's a cost of finance that needs to be considered. There's also the potential for bonding or parent company guarantees, where the client may request a performance bond that he can draw on if he feels that his performance has not met the contractual requirements. There's also things like withholding tax and whether that's applicable or not. We take advice from our tax group, and we have contracting policies in Wood Group that we need to review and comply with. There may be some items that are requested by the client that are out with our contracting policies, so we either need to get agreement to qualify or clarify that, or there may be a cost impact.
The cost being is that if we've got to carry that risk, we would price that into the tender.
Yeah.
But Bill, you mentioned there about terms and conditions and the compliance with company policy, which is what we have to do. But what if the customer would allow us to actually to qualify a contractual term?
Well, we may have to price it if that's possible, or we should take it into account when we calculate our margin that there's a higher risk in taking this contract.
Yeah. So we address that risk and we basically put a price on that risk. I think that's the main thing that we need to let people actually understand. Another point that you raised there was withholding tax. Now, most people won't be familiar with withholding tax. Can you kind of give us a synopsis about what is withholding tax and when would it apply?
Withholding tax doesn't apply that often. If we've got a permanent presence in a country, it generally won't apply, but if we were providing a one-off bespoke service into a country where we don't have a permanent presence, there may be a withholding tax, which means that when we price the job, we need to add that into our price because our client will deduct that withholding tax and pay it to the local authorities in lieu of tax. So it is a cost. In some cases you can get a credit against your home tax cost, but that very seldom applies really. So generally in most cases it becomes a cost.
Okay, so we've got our opportunity, we've identified all our people costs, we've identified all our non-people costs, we've looked at the contractual terms, we'll make sure they're compliant and whether we've priced in some risk there. So what's the next step in the process?
We have a review of the costs, a cost review meeting if you like, which is an independent peer review of the opportunity. Have we understood the contractual responsibilities? Have we understood the scope of work? And are our costs robust? And that's in terms of have we got the right level of salaries and rates and other indirect costs? Are they too high, too low? Are they competitive? And these cost reviews could be they could be quite short for a fairly simple opportunity, or they could take 1 or 2 days, as has happened recently in a large overseas opportunity.
Yeah. So we've done our ops and cost review. Next step.
Next step, following the ops and cost review, there'll be various actions and things to go back on and check, etc. The cost will be finalised, and then there's a discussion with the business development team and operations to decide on the margin to get the opportunity ready for presentation at the weekly SAM meeting.
Mm-hmm. And that's when we would actually look at if it's an opportunity with a fee or maybe a mobilisation or a transition element to it. Is, that's a strategic choice we would make as to whether we would fully back charge that or whether we would take some of that or maybe we'd absorb some of that risk, etc. at that stage as well. Okay, Bill, we've submitted our tender. The BD guys have done a fantastic job and we've secured the contract. End of story for commercial, am I right?
No, that's just the start of the game, because we've probably got 5 or 6 or 7 years to work through things so as we can win the next one. I think once we win a contract, the first thing is to get a handover of all the information from the business development group into the operations group, although that should be ongoing anyway, and have a start-up plan in place so that we get a robust start-up to the contract in terms of resourcing, getting the systems in place, setting up offices, whatever's needed. Again, going back to some earlier questions, that'll be easier in some places than others. If we're in a mature area like Aberdeen or Melbourne, we've got offices, so it'll tend to be an add-on to what we're providing. But if we're moving into a new country, then it could be 3 to 6 months before we get started up in terms of getting the proper licenses, setting up offices, setting up payrolls, hiring local people, mobilising expats, getting work permits. So on the more complex contracts, this can be quite a long-term need.
Bill, we talked about start-up in new countries and the potential for joint ventures, etc. Give us your thoughts on joint ventures.
Well, I suppose as a last resort, we could consider a joint venture, or more seriously, our strategy is that we prefer to be the prime contractor, but we understand when we go into certain countries or regions that for political reasons we need a joint venture, or to get the local resource and the local infrastructure we need a joint venture. So our first choice is be prime contractor, second choice JV with us having the majority shareholding, would be our preference. And probably third choice would be, we might consider being a subcontractor, but being a subcontractor, you're too far down the food chain sometimes to have an influence on the client and everything that goes with that, being paid and getting issues agreed or getting your point across to the client on a direct basis.
Once we're in steady state operations, Bill, what are the kind of the commercial issues that we should be aware of and we should be monitoring and managing?
Well, most of our core business is long-term, what we'll call service contracts, and one of the big things is to retain these contracts. If we're on a 5-year contract, get extended by another 5 years or 10 years or whatever. We've got quite a good record of contract retention, so it's important that when we win the contract and get mobilised, we're always thinking about growth and contract extension. So the things that the operations team should be considering are, do they fully understand the contract, the scope of work? When the scope of work changes, do we review the remuneration model? We need to keep on top of our work order management, our aged receivables, our accrued sales, and get ourselves positioned as the contract develops to make a proposal to extend the contract. And for that, we need to be positioned with the client. We need to know all our cost data, and we need to be monitoring the performance of the contract. We also need to be engaging with the client and having regular contract reviews. The nature of these contracts that operate over many years is that the remuneration model may change many times. We could start on a contract where the KPIs are a small percentage, and the client may wish to move to a lower fixed percentage with a higher risk and reward around KPIs. We may change some of the costs from reimbursable into fees to make things more efficient, and that really all depends on what company and what business you're in.
Mm-hmm. Bill, following the position to win framework, we've come through the win, we've come through the extension, and we're now into the re-tender element of this. What is the kind of role of commercial during this phase?
Well, commercial would fit in with the sales process in that any contract extension or growth opportunity we treat as a business development opportunity. So we adapt the same system. We'll look at the cost data and develop a proposal for extension. This may mean offering a different remuneration model, KPIs, different fees, etc. So it's an ever-evolving situation, and it's all part of the business cycle where we identify new opportunities, we win them, we try to extend them or grow them, and as we said previously, we've got a great track record in retention of contracts.
But we're coming off of a history of our cost data, so we're starting from a better place than where we were when we actually came into the contract before, I assume.
Yeah, with a contract extension, we've got years of history, and hopefully over the years we've managed to also save some money on our costs and do things more efficiently to make the client a more competitive and compelling offering.
And hopefully grow our margin there as well.
And hopefully grow our margin.
Okay, well thank you, Bill, for your time. I hope you've been able to get something out of that brief conversation between Bill and ourselves, but there'll be a few nuggets in there for you, something for you to think about and help you in getting more out of the course. Thank you.